And welcome back. We are now going to go ahead and get started with our midground layer. So to start this off, let's make another folder, but this time we're going to go ahead and rename this to midground. And I'm going to go ahead and just position this in between my foreground and background folder since it is the middle. And I'm going to add a new layer here. And I'm going to go ahead and call this my mountain layer because I'm going to, again, have another set of mountains, but this time a little bit closer in view. So to get started here, I'm just going to go ahead and color pick that same color that we had previously used for our mountains. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make that a little bit darker and bring that down into the blues a little bit more here, just so we get some nice contrast here between those two regions. And then just like before, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my pencil tool and I'm just going to go ahead and paint in some mountains here. And then I'm going to go ahead and shape that with the brush and eraser tool to however I want that to be. And I'm just going to go ahead and shape something in here. And I want you to go ahead, do the same, shape it in, fill in your mountains. And eventually we're going to come back and we're going to create something more. All right, and welcome back. Here's what I went ahead and created here. And you can see it's a pretty nice contrast to the background mountains that we had done before. The next thing we want to do is actually come over here to our layers panel and add in 2 new layers here. And holding down the control key, I'm going to go ahead and select those. And what I want to do is create what's called a clipping mask. So once those are selected, let's go ahead and come up here to go ahead and create that clipping mask. So under layer, we go to create clipping mask. And you can see that these are now changed here. You can see like the little directional arrows that are with these. What that's going to help us do is help kind of restrain where we are adding things into our images. Now the first thing I want to do is go ahead and take the bottom layer here. And let's go ahead and select again that dark original color. And we're actually going to lighten that just a little bit and bring this down. For this purpose, let's take it to more of the greens here. And bring that up a little bit. And let's go ahead and paint here on our mountains. And we're pretty much going to go ahead and add a little bit of green hillside. So with that color in mind, we're going to go ahead and paint in. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and pause that video for real quick for you. Again, using that same color that we just picked out, you can pick, again, a different color. But what you want to do is go ahead and paint that in and make it so that it's just effectively adding the border to your mountain here. So we're just going to kind of paint here along a little bit here. And you can adjust your brush size here to kind of find the right color that's going to work for you. And you might have to adjust it a little bit here and there to kind of get that right size that you want to work with. But again, the idea here is that you're going to try to be working with these mountains in such a way that you're effectively showing the border of where everything is at here. All right. So again, I'm going to pause the video, and when we come back, let's just see our different borders here so we can go ahead and help start separating out the individual peaks of this mountainside. All right, and we're back. So you can see how I've added highlights to effectively the edge where the sunlight would be coming in and striking each of the front face of these different ranges here. I've also added some interior pieces here to kind of help add a couple more pieces that might be part of this mountain range. And I've also added some vertical pieces to show different pieces of rock that might be piecing into here, so we have different layers effectively within our rock face, and even kind of some steps here. We are eventually going to be adding things like waterfalls and stuff in here, so I also added some more chunkier parts here to kind of show different changes in elevation. Now, one more thing I did mention, of course, we had the sun coming in. I did notice that these areas with the sun coming in could be a little thicker, so all I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and take my brush size that I have and go ahead and bring that brush size on up. And I'm just going to kind of generously apply areas here on the bigger chunks of these mountains here. And just go ahead and paint in some of these highlight areas just a little bit. I don't want to go too crazy because, again, I want to be able to have some of those other regions still reserved for some of the things that we're going to end up doing. But we, of course, are just doing this to kind of help add just a little bit more of some of that layer and dimension that we may not have had otherwise within this shape here. And again, do this here on some of all these here. And if we look and we say, you know, that we may have done just a little too much, that's okay. We can always switch to our eraser tool and just clean some of that up. All right, that's looking pretty nice. All right, now the next thing to do is to kind of add a little bit more natural transition between some of these areas. Because currently when I'm using this pencil brush, you can notice, of course, we are adding in areas that are a little bit thicker with some of our regions here for some of these painting areas. However, we want to kind of make this so these two colors blend just a little bit more. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my pencil down to 0, and let's go ahead and zoom this in just a little bit. And I'm just going to go ahead and create pretty much a series of like almost random dots here to kind of show some of these colors transitioning out. And what that's going to do is it's going to just simply make the fade between these two colors a little bit more natural without me having to introduce a ton of different like gradients or shadows and highlight colors, because it's just going to make that transition seem a little bit more natural here between the rock and this kind of green tree-ish layer here. All right, and again, it can be a little bit more scattered. It does not have to be perfect. But even just doing these few small subzones here, and I'll show you this here in just a second, you can see how much more natural this looks in the overall picture. So I'm just going to zoom this back on out. And you can see just by doing that, it makes those green sections that were very harsh to look at a little bit more natural. Now, obviously, there's going to be some more detail that I'm going to add in here. I'm going to invite you to do the same to your picture. And then when we come back, let's go ahead and just see how detailed this ends up looking here with all these kind of random scatter dots. And of course, you can put some just randomly throughout the mountainside here as well, which of course can also help break up some of that image. So I will see you in just a minute. And we're back. You can see just how much work has gone into adding this detail here. However, you will notice that again, this is just pretty much a random smattering of dots here that we have used to effectively add a lot of detail and texture to this mountainside without having to get super crazy about all the little nuances that might have to go into it otherwise. All right, now the last thing we want to do is add in some highlights. Now you can of course come back and do additional shadow work and stuff like that if you want to, but for now let's just go ahead and just do some highlights on our mountain. So what we're going to do is take this color that we had, bring it up a little bit into our desaturations here, and bring it down a little bit closer to some of our yellows. And we're going to do pretty much the very same thing that we've been doing. We're going to go right along the edge here and just go ahead and paint in where that sun would be striking these zones here. And so we're just going to go ahead and paint that in. And just like how we had done with the lighter colors, we're going to go ahead and add in just some random dots to kind of help transition that color in so it blends just a little bit nicer versus being just a random color that's smacked there on the side. So I'm going to go ahead and again take a quick break, and when we come back, let's see how this all comes together. One thing I did forget to mention though before we take a break is that if you want to make your job even easier, is you can use that second layer that we had created, the second clipping layer here. So I'm actually going to back this up just a little bit here, and I want to actually put this onto this new clipping layer here, because again that's going to kind of help keep that distinct from our layer with the green, so we're not end up having to constantly wage war between those two color zones. And again, same thing as before, let's go ahead and just fill that in. So again, you want this one to be on that second clipping layer that we had created, and that's going to just keep that distinct, so when I hide that one, you can still see the green layer that's underneath. All right, now let's go ahead and take that break and see what we come up with. And there we have it, ladies and gentlemen. We have our finished mountainside for our midground. So we still have, of course, our background mountains here. We now have our midground mountains here. And I can actually, now that if I'm done with these mountains, of course, I could merge these down. But for now, I'm just going to leave these two clipping layers as is. And when we come back next time, we're going to add even more dimension to this midground layer, which is currently where most of our action is going to be taking place. Specifically, even though we have some of this green terrain, it would be nice if we could add different things such as trees or even like a waterfall to this mountainside. So we're going to, in the next couple of videos, take a look at some of these different elements that we can add to this to really add to the next level to this image.